Welcome. So this is my roughly 20 minutes talk about the topic AI token economy and why it is important, in my opinion, not only for engineers, but literally everybody who is using AI, because it can give you superpowers, but there are hidden, I would call them managing responsibilities that previously were left to staff level or director level decisions. And this is something I want to give you an overview of. Okay, so yeah, let's start. So first, I want to give you a thought experiment. And this thought experiment's purpose is to help you a bit reframing how to view AI. So this is where I want you to really pay attention and just to be open and bear with me and see if you can spot the similarities. So this thought experiment I want to make is that if you imagine you are assigned a freelancer, right? A freelancer to help you to help you become more productive at your daily job or projects. And this freelancer has some really weird characteristics. And on the left side, we can assume these are strengths, right? So they are really fast and really well read. And importantly, well read means they basically know about everything you ask them, right? They have a huge set of knowledge and and they said that extremely fast. And then they accept any task you give them. They don't really, and maybe this is already a flaw, they don't ask questions, right? So they really just take a task you give them and then go with it. And lastly, they are tireless. So they don't need a break. They could work 24/7 unless you stop paying them. Okay? Imagine this is a freelancer. They are very eager to please you because obviously they want to bill you, right? They want to earn money. And the bill goes directly to your company. And the last and the most interesting flaw is they have amnesia, right? So at every new conversation, they forgot what you told them the last conversation. Okay, so this is the thought experiment I want you to think about. And obviously, we're talking about an LLM, right? So what all the characters I described are from LLMs. But what I want you to try is if it was a human, if it was a real person, think about how you would manage them, how you would work with them, right? In order to achieve a goal which makes you or everybody happy. And as we go through this presentation, my hope is that you will spot more and more similarities with this kind of frame, like a freelancer, right? And my hope is that this will help you reframe or give you another set of perspective on how to view working with AI. That is my goal for this talk. And maybe just a bit of not a warning, but maybe a wake-up call. I think everybody knows so far now. You can definitely opt out in managing it. You can just keep using it and as you have so far. But the thing is that what I observe on the open market outside, people who are dealing with this on this level are becoming more productive. 5, 10x, 20x faster. And you can obviously imagine the market will leave you behind if you don't adjust to it. And here also, there are two different categories we need to think about. And that is for the individual, right? So if one person is working with this freelancer AI, and if it is a leader, so leading people who are then working. So there are different, I would say, dimensions to this. Okay? So this is the thought experiment. So keep that in your mind as we go through the next slides and the content of this talk. So let's continue. Now, the things this is a short overview on how AI developed in the past 3 years. And I would say the core message here in this slide is that whenever there's a new technology, usually people or humans try to develop new processes and new disciplines to cope with it, right? And I'm really using the word coping here because usually this technology far outpaces what the normal human mind is able to process. And maybe to zoom out a little bit, if you look at software development, right, that is also another discipline that lets people, humans, access the raw computing power. So it's a translation process between human requirements and problems until they can access this immensely powerful computing power to do some work. And software engineering is just a translation layer in between. And with AI, certain parts of those layers are eroding, especially like writing code, right? And this is what one of my former CEO told me, and which still sticks to me today, that if human people, if your customer or whatever, a human being, was able, for example, to directly write SQL to a database, they wouldn't need a software. They wouldn't need a front-end application. They could just write SQL, right? So everything that we do is an abstraction layer to help people access that raw computing power. And similarly, this is also my mental model, is how I view AI. So when we look at 2022, 2023, when ChatGPT released, right? Back then, the first discipline to emerge was prompt engineering, basically how to talk with AI in order to get the best results. And over the next couple of years, we slowly started to progress towards agentic workflows, right? So the major difference is in chat, you basically have a chat interface, you input something, wait for reply, and then you talk to it, right? Like a chatbot, right? But in an agentic workflow, the AI is able to perform loops and tool calls like checking your file, making a web research on its own before it comes to a conclusion, and then output some result for you, right? And there, the new discipline is context engineering. So if an agent can work autonomously, what context do I need to provide them in order for them to achieve the right result, right? And this gave rise to all those memory files and skills. So agents.md or claude.md are memory files and skills to abstract and reuse specific functions and commands you usually have to write out every single time if you were doing prompt engineering, right? And right now, what I observe by having talking to lots of people, a lot of people are still using the mindset of a chat interface while using the tools of agentic engineering and workflows, but not understanding what's underneath it, right? And as you can see here in the yearly date, it's 2024, 2025 pattern. Now in 2026, we are working with harness engineering, right? This is what the lean harness AI SLD is about. It's a harness built around it to ensure deterministic results working in a non-deterministic environment, which is LLM, right? Anything you put into, you have no control what comes out on the other side. And this is the, I would say, the daunting part. Already the next term is already emerging right now called loop engineering. I don't really have a deep knowledge about it yet, but it's about self-improving. It's about scheduling based on all the previous disciplines before. And it's every 1.5 years, something new comes out in AI, and this is like growing really, really fast, right? So these are all the disciplines that we could talk about. But today I want to focus about the token economy, which has been the currency of every single era since day one, and why it's important. So let's go back to the freelancer example, the thought experiment, and now assume this freelancer that you just hired or you just assigned to you, if it was a real person, right? If it's a real person, then in a traditional workflow, you would need to create a business case and get it financially approved. You need to state, hey, I want to spend 3,200 euros to hire a consultant to do some slide work for me. And these are the 3 line items. And these are the potential benefits, because like this is a sales text, for example, that we're going to use for really high stakes sales. I want to be really professional. And the potential outcome is we get a 1 million contract, right? Then investing 3,100 euros is peanuts compared to that. And this is the traditional budget approval process that usually is reserved to senior members or project managers or staff level employees. But now you've been handed this AI, this freelancer, who just bills you with everything you talk to them, everything they talk back. And you don't really see the bill, right? But the process is still the same. You're spending money in order to accomplish something. But right now, nobody has a really, and this is like also my current information on the market, everyone is trying to figure out how to measure it, right? So we are right now in the phase where everybody's encouraging the usage of AI to use these freelancers to increase productivity, but we don't really know how to measure the outcome. So what happens right now is basically everybody now just got handed a budget they need to, or they're dealing with, right? And they're producing costs without measurable outcome. And this is like why I think this topic about being aware. So the goal is not for you to really count how much token costs, right? So that's the purpose, but for you to understand and be aware that there is an economy behind it and that we are right now living in the middle of it, trying to figure it out. And as you can imagine, if you're using always Opus, a premium model to do everything, that would equate to using your best engineers to like bring you coffee, for example, or fixing the smallest UI bug, right? You can do that. It feels great, right? So you are definitely getting the dopamine for using that. But if you could have achieved something similar using the same or cheaper model, right, then that is what will actually bring benefit in the long term. And maybe this is like a really interesting information for most of you. This was also new for me. I only got to know this like the past couple of weeks, that we are right now living in a very heavily subsidized environment when it comes to AI and tokens. So there are estimations that basically for every dollar we are spending on a subscription, the real cost is between 2 to 10 times higher, right? And most of the forecasts tell us that tokens and AI will become more more expensive over the next month and years. And so this is like probably the way to sensitize that right now we are living a bit on borrowed time. Right now the stuff is cheap and it is like an opportunity for us to experiment, to learn about this before it's getting too late and we're not giving access to it anymore, or even we have to pay it ourselves, right? And it has always been this way that the winning force is not the best outcome, but the outcome per input you're putting in. It's a ratio, okay? So this is the, I would say, the basic motivation I want to put you through. And now the remaining is really some practical content and theory you can put to use. So let's start directly with what is a token, right? And this is a really, really short basic information. So a token is a basic unit of data for LLMs. And you can roughly say it equates to three-fourths of a word, right? So I have one of my favorite quotes here from Einstein. So insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. You can see here insanity has been split into 2 tokens. And because LLMs are not working with semantic and words, they're working with numbers, right? They're predicting statistically the next likely token. That's all what an LLM is. So you need to transfer words into numbers, and this is called the token ID. And using that, it's going to predict, giving the existing context, what is the next likely token. And as you can see here, some words are being broken up, but also those the spaces, right? They are actually part of the token. And also things like a dot is part of the token, right? So these are the basic unit that's being passed to an LLM. And there are a small demo here you can try out. And so this is not just a rough estimation, right? Some interactive part, you can try it out. But there are also free tools like a tokenizer, you can Google them, where this is sourced from, just to try it out how much token, for example, a input of you actually is. So this is some basic information. And you are built in 4 ways currently. For every input token, so everything you are sending. For every output, everything the LLM talks back. And since a couple of years also the concept of write and read caching, because definitely this is cheaper than processing or reprocessing every single input you're sending the LLM. So this is the basic unit. Now, how do you measure it? And this is something I would say I want to encourage everyone, even the non-engineers, to try out and using CLI tools. Because most often you're getting a meter, right? You're getting something like you've used 20% of your session, of a 5-hour session, or in Augment, for example, you're seeing the usage of credits. But credits is an abstraction over tokens, right? And for CLI tools, you can use the /context to give you a really detailed information on what actually consists in your current conversation in the token usage. And this helps you to understand where those token goes to. And just a short summary here, you can see that right now the message part is roughly 20,000 tokens. So this is the things I've been sending to the LLM. But you can see here something like the system prompt and the system tools. Those are basically the tags, I would call them, like the conversation tags. So every time you start a new conversation, you are spending already, or I'm spending in this case, 50,000 tokens out of the box, right? And this is expensive. So every single new conversation I'm spending already, in this case, giving a context window of only 20,000, I'm spending already 25% of the entire context window. What's a context window? I'm going to talk like in a couple of minutes, but this gives you already a feeling on what goes or what happens underneath, just to understand where all those tokens and usage comes from, right? And so what's happening right now is that lots of the tools you are using, and this is my hypothesis, this is my personal hypothesis, right? Is basically that all the AI vendors are hiding or trying to abstract that information on purpose because they want to get you to hooked on the good stuff, right? So it's like a heroin shot, right? You are really addicted, becoming addicted to the best performing model because it throws out dopamine and you are getting used to it. You always want to use Opus for the best stuff, for the best results. And right now it costs, you're getting subsidized. But the reality is, and this has been a business playbook since for a long time, to start out cheap, but then to increase the prices once people got the adoption, right? So they will increase the prices. So if you now get hooked on the good stuff, but do not have the understanding and the processes to work also with like less capable models, but definitely cheaper, when the prices are going to be raised, and they will be going to raise, right? The question is what you're going to do, right? So this is like, I would say, a basic primer on token, on my interpretation currently on what's out there on the market. So I've talked about the context. So let's have a quick look at it, because I think this is the most practical information you can take away. And this leads also back again to the freelancer model compared to your human. Because imagine you're going to work in the morning, you're fresh, right? You can deal with complex stuff, but by 5 p.m. in the evening, you have like basically no attention span anymore. You are tired, right? And this concept sort of applies also to every single session with an LLM, and that is called the context window. Okay, so it's like in the LLM's attention span. And I have here two examples. The above one is the example of a plain chat. So if you use Copilot or ChatGPT, for example, then when you start it up, there are some boot up costs, right? Like system calls, tools, and system prompts, tools, skills, memory. And then you write a message, it's going to reply something. You write a message, going to reply something. And over the time, this window will fill up, right? And there is... So I have it in a couple of slides, but basically, as you can imagine, the more you reach the end of the context window, the dumber or the more likely the AI will hallucinate stuff, right? And this is why you should be aware of where you're using the context window at. And using the VS Code plugin for Augment or Claude, for example, you don't get that information. This is really important. You do not have access to the context. If you use Claude Code Desktop, for example, I'm going to show it later, there are right now already a UI which shows the context, but that is why, especially for development, I encourage everybody to try out the CLI, because there you can always use the /context to monitor your current context window. Okay, and for agentic workflows, this is even worse, because right now you have the same boot up cost, for example, but for example, your task is say, hey, refactor, for example, this file for me. Now, what it does is, because the agentic can perform its own function tool calls, it's going to say, I'm going to read 12 files, right? So it's going to use a bash script, for example, grep or glob, to pull up those files. And everything that the LLM finds, it will send as an input, as if you were basically copy pasting that text to the LLM, and that incurs costs, right? So basically you're having here a huge chunk of context and also token usage for reading the files. Then it's going to maybe run some text, some tests, a couple more tool calls, and finally it's going to output and apply the patches or the changes. So especially using agentic tools, and that includes Claude Code, Augment, you're going to use up this context window pretty fast if you're not careful. And talking about why it is bad to use up the entire context, there's this concept of the lost in the middle. And again, this is really eerily similar to how human attention span work, right? For humans, in the cognitive bias, you have the so-called like peak-end rule or zero position effect, right? Or primacy effect. So basically, in each conversation, you're more likely to remember the beginning and also the end. And the peak-end rule says also the highlights. But everything in between, you are most likely not to remember that well. And something very similar is happening with AI. So if you're using a really long context window, the stuff that you said, important decisions you make, for example, right? If they're in the middle of the pack, there is a potential, or there's a good possibility that they're gonna either hallucinate decisions or ignore or forget your decisions, right? And so this is why you're always encouraged to stay in what's right now the market is calling the smart zone. And this is depending, and there's not a lot of research on it, but basically you can say beneath 50% or beneath 200 to 250,000 tokens, depending on how big the context window is. And for me personally, I usually always stop at around 200,000 tokens if the context window is 1 million tokens, which is right now becoming the norm. So if you have no way to measure and monitor the context, you don't know, right? You might have a feeling, but again, with using agentic tools, with all the tool calls performed, it's really hard to really get a grasp on this, right? So this is a reason why you should definitely try to monitor the context, and the technique on continue once you reach that threshold is compacting or handing something off. So ask the AI to create a summary, right? And that summary could be a text file or it could be even a prompt. Then you basically copy that prompt, you start a new session, paste that prompt in, and then you continue. And this is a balance because as I mentioned earlier, for every new conversation, you have to pay a boot up tax, right? So this is really now the part of AI fluency where you know it's worth stretching the context, or where you should definitely start a new conversation and pay the new conversation tax again, okay? And I would say this practice is probably the one I would recommend you the most to try out, regardless if you're doing coding or not, just to get a basic sense of feeling, because the goal is not for you to know exactly how much token it costs or what each match is going to cost you, but to be able to estimate how much tokens you roughly need for a session, for a specific task, because that is the basis on the next part on choosing which model you're going to use, right? So if you know roughly, hey, this task, I'm going to do grill me's, I'm going to do refinements, right? It's really highly complex. I'm probably going to need Opus for that. So right now I'm estimating the scope, maybe 20 questions, right? So that might well stretch beyond the 20,000 or 300,000 tokens for the context window. Should I maybe cut the framing to a half? So divide and conquer, so I can stay within the smart zone or the threshold. These are all the decisions you can make before you start calling the AI. And this is what for me also part of AI fluency is. Okay, so now let's have a quick look on what actually those tokens cost, right? So this is a really simplified example for fixing a bug. So when you start booting up Claude Code or Augment, you say, hey, this is my ticket, I want to fix a bug. You're going to pay the 35,000 roughly assistant calls, right? And then you start maybe asking, the AI maybe ask you some question back, and you're going to input some query. So you can see here, these costs here accumulate. And whenever the AI is thinking, right? So thinking basically means they're outputting some token, so you're going to pay for that. If that thinking results into some tool calls, hey, I maybe need to check some other files. So the command itself, it's a really short output token cost because it's just a bash script function call, right? But the results of that file content, maybe it's some really large file, so maybe over 8,000 words or 12,000 tokens, that's going to send back to the LLM without you even realizing, right? Basically, you're just seeing it's loading something, it's doing something. But that is also going to be billed as input tokens. And then you might think again, and you can always basically observe those loading messages. You can see that modern Claude Code, for example, Opus, likely thinks 1, 2, 3, 4 times before it's gonna really output some final response, right? And so over the time, those token usage will accumulate. And now here is the trap, right? You're not paying the, in this case, the roughly 70,000 tokens. You're paying much more because every single time you're inputting something to the LLM, you're sending the entire conversation history with every single file it discovered, with every single results, decisions, including the system prompts, you're going to send again to the LLM. So while the context window might only be 70,000 tokens, you are actually paying much more, in this case roughly for 226,000 tokens. Input tokens and roughly 16,000 output tokens, right? So this really accumulates the longer you're staying in the same conversation. And now given the current pricing, you can see using Opus in this really small bug fixing example, you would already pay roughly $1.50, right? Doesn't sound much, but again, it's a really small task for one single, maybe for one single human. And compared to some other models like Sonnet, which is also really capable, it's almost 1/3 of the price. And if you use like other models, even cheaper, like DeepSeek, for example, it's like 14 times cheaper. And now if you imagine this scales to an organization of over 2,000 people, right? And scaling that up, that can amount to a lot of money real fast. And there is the forecast that AI in 1 or 2 years might become more expensive than hiring humans, right? So this is the reason being aware of using which model for which task and the understanding beneath how the token works is really, really crucial, in my opinion, for everybody. So let me give you an example on how I work, right? So for my workflow, I usually have like these 3 different buckets on a specific task, right? So this is like for you on to define. And for the ideation refinement, I have a Gemini Pro license privately. And there I can use a flat rate. So this doesn't cost me anything, right? And there I can use really great models like 3.5 Flash or Gemini 3.1 Pro just to do like some basic research, Q&As, and also some initial designing and decision making with grading sessions. And that I can use as an output to really then use the big guns, right? Opus, if I want to write a really high level but detailed specification, including architecture, initial product setup, I'm definitely sticking to Opus. For some medium feature changes, I can use Gemini 3.1 High, right? Pro High. And this switch, right? So this habit of knowing for which task I'm going to use which model, for me has become second nature. So it's not rare that I have like in my terminal 5 sessions open in parallel and just switch between them because I know for this task I'm using this model, right? And you can notice that I'm really like biased towards like Claude and Google models, so I have less experience of other models like OpenAI and Grok and so on. But the basic idea is that to try out these models and see which one works for you, for your person's settings, right? But become fluent and know which model to use for which tasks, right? For example, low level or low stake, like committing messages, right? You can use something cheaper like the low model of Flash. And for exploration, and other things, you can also use cheaper models, but maybe if you have some more complex thing you want to implement, I'm using Sonnet or Gemini 3.1 Pro. So the message here is like, this is a landscape, a mental model for you to develop, to know which model to use for which tasks, okay? And lastly, so nearing the end of this talk, so these are some levers for you to think about what you can use right now to increase your fluency and efficiency with token economy. So there are some automated tools, definitely, like Headroom RTK, or if you're using Augment, right, using Augie CLI, they have this Prism. So this is an automated routing tool which directs some, so they will automatically send some lower stakes or less demanding prompts to a cheaper model and route complex stuff to a more expensive model. So these are some automated tools. You can read them for yourself. They are all mostly open source, which definitely can reduce the token usage. I would highly recommend. Then you have the agent steering, right? And this is called steering because there is no guarantee. You can have skills, you can have rules, you can have saying something really strict in the memory files, but everything you pass to the LLM, the outcome is non-deterministic. But it can still help achieve like maybe a 99% confidence that can help you in managing the entire workflow. And lastly, these are some really practical tips that you can use that are also really basically best practice out there. So if you're using a chat tool, for example, you can avoid blowing up the context window by editing previous messages. So if you write something and the output is not satisfactory, don't write a new message, right? Instead, go up to the previous message or maybe two message, edit it, and then send that, right? This will basically send everything of the conversation up to that point, and you're now polluting your conversation, your context window anymore. So this is a very practical tip if you're using those chat tools, like Claude Code Desktop, for example. The session hygiene, right? So being aware how long your conversation already runs, right? Bloated mega threads will cause AI to hallucinate. And again, being able to monitor the context window is definitely being a benefit here. But if you can have a rough gut feeling, hey, I've already talked like 10, 15 messages, right now it makes sense to start a new one, ask the AI to create a handoff, right? There are skills for that, but you can just say, hey, write me a summary so I can continue a new session. So this is like session hygienes, which you can also doing right now. I think the longest term for you is to, which definitely contributes to the AI fluency, is to develop a mental model to know which model you're using for which job. So this is the previous slide I just showed you. Using CLI, not something difficult. It's really easy these days because you can ask AI to help you to learn that, right? So everything that you don't know, just ask the AI to give you a step-by-step instruction. But getting familiar with the CLI tools, I would say, is like a fundamental skills moving forward for everybody. And at its core, it's not a developing tool. Most people are afraid of it because they think it's some developing part and you're not a developer. It's just another chat interface, you can see it that way, with some shortcuts, right? So please get used to that. And lastly, define your own workflows, right? So know for which task you need which skills, which model, and build up yourself a personal mental model so that you become fluent in switching the models for the right task. Okay, so that are some, I would say, is my short talk about the AI token economy, for you to be aware that the output or the outcome should be viewed to optimize for outcome per input, some basic information about how tokens, what tokens are, what context windows are, for you to learn to manage them in order to achieve the best result. Okay, yeah,